I suppose from now on I won't have to pick on Susan about the ESV rendition. I brought one this time. We'll be using that as our main text. If that's all right with everyone, this is I have my King James also, but this is what I want to use for a study Bible. It's one that I recently picked up, the Archaeology Study Bible. I'm still not convinced that it has advantages over an earlier archaeological study Bible I owned that was in the NIV, the New International Version. That's one of the reasons I didn't use it very often publicly, because of my aversion to using that version in a way that would appear to endorse it. The NIV has had some issues. It has some things to commend it. I like the way you can go to parts of the Old Testament and read passages that will be clearer probably in modern English than they might be in the older King James language. You just have to work through a little bit more in the latter. But the problem with the NIV is the translating committee had several on it who were influenced by Calvinistic ideas. That goes without saying. I mean, I say that a lot. That's an obvious point. It should be. If anyone wanted to dispute it, they could investigate the background of the men who actually were the translators. That's available. You can go out and look that up and see who they were, what their credentials are, where they came from, where they were teaching, and find out that a number of them were Calvinistic in their orientation. And it comes through sometimes. Well, I'm sad to say the ESV is not completely free from that. There, as we point out before, a few places here and there where that comes through slightly. The problem is Calvinism is so influential in just about every segment of our religious world today, in this country in particular, that it's hard to avoid some influence here and there. But as long as we can recognize, I suppose we have that advantage, and we can be careful. I don't know of any issues that would come up in that regard here in Genesis. It's a good translation of Genesis. So, although I've made those fair warnings, they shouldn't be taken as being any kind of serious objections to the use of it. Now, I believe we were in chapter 45 and 42, verse 25. 42:25. That's correct. Yes. Thank you. Problem is spend 2 weeks and then going back over this and getting ready for it by reading to the end kind of makes you lose track in a way. 42 verse 25. Anyone want to help me out a little bit, help me save my voice by giving us a brief rundown on where we are in verse 25 and why we're here? Just a simple explanation to remind us.
The famine is upon the land all across Egypt and where Jacob lives, and he has sent his sons to get food from Egypt. Joseph has met up with them and has spoken with them, knows who they are, but he spoke through a translator. They don't know who he is, and now he's sending them back for Benjamin. He held Simeon for hostage? No.
Yes, he will hold Simeon. At first he said he was going to keep them all, but then he reneged on that and said Simeon would be their representative. So, all right, good synopsis. So back in verse 18, you have Joseph challenging them. Of course, he knows the whole situation, but he's testing them, and they deserve it. And we learn a lot about these men. After all those years, they're not the same men anymore as those rash young men who were jealous and hateful toward their brother. That's all in the past. They obviously have grown up. These are mature. You're going to see that all the way through, how mature they are. And it's a heartening story in that sense to see redemption in a family. They were pretty bad dudes to put their brother in a pit, wanting to kill him at first, and then sold him off into slavery, then lied to the father where he'd never go looking for him and making him think his son was dead. That's bad. But eventually they've been through enough in life. They're starting to learn that what you do can come back to haunt you. So back in verse 18, Joseph is testing them, and he's trying to tell them, look, I think you're spies. Of course, he knew they weren't, but they didn't know that. They didn't know who he was. And I believe that you came here just to reconnoiter the land. So in order to prove to me that you're legitimately a family, you need to bring that younger brother you mentioned back here and let me see for myself. And they didn't want to have to do that. They knew what distress that would cause for their father, Jacob. But It's going to be a necessity. They'll find out. So he's bringing this up and setting this. He's wanting to see Benjamin. He's setting up this test. He's also trying to find out just how they would react. And he's learning that by this test, this series of tests. So now we go down, and on the way out, he tries this. Simeon is kept there, bound before their eyes, verse 24. So to be sure they'll come back and redeem him from slavery. That's almost foreshadowing, is it not? And I think it was intentionally so. You have foreshadowing what would come. All Israel would be slaves in Egypt, would be bound there. That's going to happen later. And this is all setting the stage for that. So verse 25, and Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain and to replace every man's money in his sack and to give them provisions for the journey. This was done for them. Now they didn't know it that. They didn't know that. You see, they came there just straight up buy food. It was just going to be a straightforward transaction. Here's money. We need the food. So he has his servants to pull a fast one, sneaking the money back into their sacks. Verse 26, then they loaded their donkeys with their grain and departed. And as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at the lodging place, he saw his money in the mouth of his sack. Can you not imagine how his heart sank to realize the trouble he was in? Well, he was in. And so he says to his brothers, my money has been put back. Here it is in the mouth of my sack. At this their hearts failed them, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, what is this that God has done to us? Now there is a key statement also in their spiritual growth and development. They are cognizant of the working of God in the world. Is it true that God has done this to them? Well, who did it physically?
Joseph had it put back in. You talking about the money?
Yeah.
The whole situation?
Yeah, this situation here with the money.
Joseph had it.
He had it done by servants, physically went in and put the money in there, hid it away. All right. But when they saw it, they knew somehow that money ended up in their bag. They didn't know how. But they knew to let this happen, heaven had to sit back at least and acquiesce to let this thing happen to us, because they knew the dire consequences. They could be killed for that sort of disrespect to the second in command in Egypt, as they would have viewed it. Had it been something that, they did on their own, or someone in their company had done secretly. So when you get to verse 29, they continued their journey on back to Canaan. When they came to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them, saying, the man, the Lord of the land. I love that expression here in the ESV. The man, the Lord of the land. The RSV, well, at least a commentator using the RSV, Brother Clyde Woods, used to call him the vizier. I think that was the title that would translate into English best, the vizier of the land. We know of such a position, and that's why he mentions that word. Now, I don't know if that's not the actual Egyptian word, but it's equivalent. But it was the second in command, the governor in Egypt, who would be even as a father, in the sense of a counselor, to Pharaoh. Pharaoh would look up to the second in command as a father figure or a close confidant. So this is not without precedent, by the way. We know from Egyptian records that this kind of office existed. It's not just made up out of whole cloth for the biblical narrative. But anyway, the man, where were we? What?
Verse
30. Okay. The Lord of the land spoke roughly to us and took us to be spies of the land. Now, was that fair for him to speak roughly to them? Well, I guess it was about time. They really deserved it. Well, we said to him, we are honest men. We have never been spies. We are so a spy is not an honest man. Right? Okay. Just thought I'd set that forth, because today it seems that some tend to overlook spies, even our own government. Chinese spies, for example, no big deal if you have a honey trap, a fang or whatever. I mean, that's no big deal. But it's a big deal because they're dishonest and they're there to do dirty work. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is this day with our father in the land of Canaan. Verse 33, then the man, the Lord of the land, said to us, by this I shall know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me and take grain for the famine of your households and go your way. Bring your youngest brother to me. Then I shall know that you are not spies, but honest men, and I will deliver your brother to you, and you shall trade in the land. Fair enough, right? That was a good exchange. In other words, I'm going to prove you this way. Simeon will stay here. You go back. Bring Benjamin the next time you come. And then, of course, Simeon would be released if they were to fulfill their end of the bargain. As they emptied their sacks, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. So one had been discovered already on the way. Now when they opened, they found every one of them had money back. And when they saw, and their father saw, and when they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob their father said to them, you have bereaved me of my children. How true that is. He didn't know the full extent of how true that was. Joseph is no more. That was their fault. And Simeon is no more. And now you would take Benjamin? All this has come against me. Jacob has had a difficult life compared to his fathers and his father and grandfather. They had their own vicissitudes in life, but Jacob's life is not as happy as theirs. He's especially because of the Joseph incident, the deception. What goes around comes around. I know that old silly platitude is worn out, but in this case, as a matter of fact, he'd been the deceiver, right? He had been a trickster and a huckster. Thought he was so smart because he could manipulate people by deceiving them. Now it comes back on him. See how that feels? Well, anyway, he's had a hard life, and he's telling the truth about these tough things he's had to face. All this has come against me. Verse 37, then Reuben said to his father, now Reuben is considered himself a patriarch with a prerogative that we would not have today and aren't want to have, any of us. As the patriarch, he had the power like a civil leader or governor of life and death over his own family. So he says, kill my two sons if I do not bring him back to you. In other words, I promise we'll keep Benjamin safe. But if I don't, if I can't fulfill that, you're welcome to kill my two sons. As though that's going to be a consolation to the father. Kill the grandkids. Okay, yeah, that'll be. Kill my two sons if I do not bring him back. I don't think they thought it through, the implication. Yeah, you can kill the grandkids. Okay. Put him in my hands and I will bring him back to you. But he said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead and he's the only one left. And of course, they did not pause to say, well, Daddy, about that, we need to tell you. We didn't actually see him dead. They didn't go into that, did they? They just sort of silently thought, well, if that's what he's thought all these years. And they don't know. As far as they know, that could be accurate now, that in slavery he could have died. If harm should happen to come to... No, my son should not go down with you, for his brother is dead and he's the only one left. The only one left, what about the rest? Well, son of Rachel. Exactly. Special wife Rachel. You had Joseph and Benjamin. If harm should come to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol. I know some commentators stop and spend a lot of time on Sheol. Over the years, I've discussed it. The research I had to do for my doctoral dissertation in Amherst required looking into biblical backgrounds about belief in life after death. Sheol is the Hebrew word, or Sheol, referring to the place of the dead, the unseen world of the dead. There's been a lot of misinformation. Some, even well-meaning conservative scholars, a few, have tried to argue that Sheol is just a metaphor. It's a figure of speech for the grave, or it's kind of like metonymy for the grave. That's not really accurate. Now, sometimes the grave is involved because it's thought that's where the body goes, but the person is not in the grave. The person goes on to the realm that could be called Sheol. And I believe the better equivalent you find, the conceptual equivalent, is in the Greek language in the New Testament. New Testament Greek, Hades, the Hadean realm. So you wouldn't argue that they were precisely the same concept. However, I would say it this way. In other words, you had the Hebrews with a limited view of what life after death would be like because God only gradually revealed those pieces of information, little by little. And eventually more light would come with more revelations, especially in the New Testament era. And you could say that when the New Testament takes over the word Hades from Greek, it knows there's a long background in mythology among Greek-speaking people. But that doesn't mean that it buys into all the mythology. It just means that that word is adequate to describe the unseen realm of the dead, the intermediate state between our lives now and final judgment.
Even with the Hebrews' limited knowledge of Sheol or Hades, in essence, they're still one and the same as far as where he really would be going if he died, right? I mean, that's just a matter of
Well, of course, that's a correct assumption, I would think. That's an assumption, but I believe it's defensible. I don't see why you would not defend it, that it has always been God's way that when a human spirit departs from the body in death, that the spirit would go into that intermediate state. This is not something that has just developed in time. The revelation about that, the information was incrementally revealed about it, so that little by little they gained more insight into this. But yes, I believe even the very first, Adam and Eve, when they died, they went off into the Hadean realm. So I don't think that God's arrangements for where the spirit goes after death has been a changed arrangement. Now, again, I didn't want to spend too much time on that, but it does usually come up when you talk about Sheol. And this is what does it say? The grave in the King James? Anybody have the King James there on that, down to the grave, or is it Sheol? Verse down to the grave. Okay, so here the King James translators interpreted it to mean the grave. That's one of the reasons why, as I said, even conservative scholars will often equate it with a grave. And there obviously is a connection, a conceptual connection between the grave. We speak of the grave. I'm going to the grave. What do we mean? I'm dying. I'll be dead. And Sheol. All right, let's go to verse 40, chapter 43, verse 1. Sorry, if I seem a little excitable, I've never been on steroids before, and I've been on them all week, and they kind of affect the way you feel and think. Now the famine was severe in the land, and when they had eaten the grain that they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go again, buy us a little food." Well, they had brought back food, obviously, but it just didn't last long enough because, I guess when they first bought it, they had hoped that the conditions would subside and things would improve. Conditions would improve in Canaan for agriculture, but the conditions had not improved. But Judah said to him, "The man," what man? The man. Joseph's the man. He's talking about Joseph. The man solemnly, they still don't know who he is. The man solemnly warned us, saying, "You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you." Have they not wondered how's Simeon doing? I mean, did you ever get letters from him? Anyway, "If you will send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.'" Israel said, now who's that? Jacob. So it's interchangeable here in the latter chapters of Genesis. "Why did you treat me so badly as to tell the man that you had another brother?" In other words, that is so human. Like, why in the world did you bring up the whole situation or the whole idea of, you didn't have to mention our family secrets to this guy? Well, yes, they did, and they will explain why. They replied, "The man questioned us carefully about ourselves and our kindred, saying, 'Is your father still alive? Do you have another brother?' What we told him was in answer to these questions." So, Daddy, we didn't have any choice in the matter. We had to answer it. Could we in any way know that he would say, "Bring your brother down"? Well, in fairness to them, they couldn't have possibly guessed that, right? And under most circumstances, that probably wouldn't have occurred to a vizier to say. But here he's scheming to get that brother there. He wants to see Benjamin, his brother. And Judah said to Israel, his father, "Send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you and also our little ones." So he's showing some leadership here, right? Some gumption, we might say. Judah's taking the lead now. "All right, Daddy, we got to get this thing done. We're going to die. We got to go. Give me the boy. Let's go down there and take care of this situation. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever." Again, all the nuances that we understand by what had happened in the past when the brothers had actually been to blame for Joseph's condition where he was. So now he's saying, "I'll take it on me." This is great maturity compared to what they used to be. If we had not delayed, we would now have returned twice. So in other words, they let the situation get dire again. They just didn't want to go back. even though Simeon was there. Tough, Simeon, too bad for you. I mean, they didn't want to go back because they didn't want to have to face this situation with Benjamin, what might happen. Then their father Israel said to them, if it must be so, then do this. Take some of the choice fruits of the land in your bags and carry a present down to the man. A little balm and a little honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Take double the money with you. Carry back with you the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Well, that's an odd oversight. I mean, what else would you guess if you were in his condition? Why would that money end up in those bags? Why would they have put the money in the bags, the servants of the man, after they had received the money from Joseph's brothers?
I would have thought maybe I'm being framed or set up here after all the other accusations.
Well, I think that's what the brothers had suspected. Well, I don't know that they do think this later. We're going to see a little bit later when they go to Joseph's house. They think maybe it's a way to rob them. But anyway, so they do start getting suspicious. But right now, they thought it was an oversight. Take also your brother and arise and go to the man. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, and may he send back your other brother and Benjamin. And as for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. So
We're going to starve anyway, right? All of them.
the whole family would die. They had no choice. Why was there a famine? This famine. Did this story matter enough, y'all? Listen, did this story matter enough in the grand scheme of things that there should be a famine in Canaan and Egypt, in the Middle East, the Near East, at this particular time? Why would that climatological event have an effect on world history? But it did. It did. Well, of course, it came from God. God permitted it, or in some way arranged this famine. So it all is in the purpose of God that things would be so dire that they had no choice but to go to Egypt. All right. So now God did not take the reins of their hearts in a dream at night and say, you must go to Egypt. Program them, you're not turning some dials or pushing some buttons. So when they woke up, said, must go to Egypt, must go to... Nothing like that. We're not automata. They made the decision. It's a logical decision. It was their own free will. We want to stay alive. The only place to buy grain is in Egypt. But again, this shows something about the providence of God. How he, as it were, prods and motivates and works with us even in our free will. So there's a lot to be... This is one of the most important passages in all the Bible, along with the book of Esther, that will discuss the providence of God. These two, chapters 40 and all the way down to 50. There's Joseph's story and the Esther story in the Bible. Verse 15, so the men took this present, and they took double the money with them and Benjamin. They arose and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, bring the men into the house and slaughter an animal and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon. The man did as Joseph told him and brought the men to Joseph's house. Now see, this is not the meeting place evidently prior in the first instance. Not a public building, for example. This is Joseph's private house. Must have been a fancy affair too, his second in command. And the men were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house. And they said, it is because of the money which was replaced in our sacks the first time that we are brought in, so that he may assault us and fall upon us to make us servants and seize our donkeys. So in other words, he's going to take everything we have to punish us for that event. He's going to blame us for it. He's going to make us slaves. Again, sort of, looking off into the future. As a matter of fact, their descendants would be slaves, not by Joseph, but by the Egyptians. So they went up to the steward of Joseph's house and spoke with him at the door of the house and said, oh, my Lord, we came down the first time to buy food. And when we came to the lodging place, we opened our sacks, and there was each man's money in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. So we have brought it again with us, and we have brought other money down with us to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks. He replied, peace to you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money. So it was all duly noted. Now is this not one of the stewards? I believe he's talking to the steward here. Is he not saying? Steward of the house. So this steward is aware evidently of Joseph's faith, and he knew about God in some way. So he was the one who had been responsible for carrying out Joseph's order. And he said, I knew all about the money situation. You know, you're duly receipted. It was duly noted you paid that money. So anyway, no problem here. Then he brought Simeon out to them. When the man had brought the men into Joseph's house, that would be that steward, and given them water, and they had washed their feet, when he had given their donkeys fodder, they prepared the present for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there. So he's an important man. They're there in the house waiting for this important governor of Egypt to come, and they had all these gifts their father had told them to take from Canaan. When Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present that they had with them, and bowed down to him to the ground. One more time, in fulfillment of what? Joseph's dreams as a young man. And he inquired about their welfare and said, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" They said, "Your servant our father is well. He is still alive." And they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. It's hard to read this without seeing the human factors that comes through so much. And he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son." Then Joseph hurried out, where his compassion grew warm for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. And he entered his chamber and wept there. Now these are tears, these are complicated tears. There's no simple answer to why he's weeping. This involves every complex human emotion imaginable. Joy, obviously, that's one thing. Joy, a thrill of seeing his brother now after all these years. And also a realization of what it took to get to this situation. All that he had been through. I mean, did not his life pass before his eyes? Potiphar's wife, in the prison. You would just think, being even put into the pit, all those things. And now the emotions just are overwhelming, really, when he sees that. Then he washed his face and came out, and controlling himself, he said, "Serve the food." They served him by himself and by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination. The Egyptians, of course not. You wouldn't expect that. Kind of ironic, is it not, in a way, when you look at the Jewish attitude toward foreigners now later. But the foreigners, the Egyptians, wouldn't eat with these Hebrews. Well, it's also true that it would not have been expected for Joseph to have eaten with them at the same table yet because of his status. But then there was this hang-up that they had. The Egyptians thought the Hebrews were a lower people. We're going to find out later one of the reasons is the Hebrews were nomadic, pastoral people. They got dirty. They hung around sheep. The Egyptians were city folks, most of them, hoity-toity, and they kind of looked down on the country folks. Go ahead.
I was wondering, and I may have known and forgotten, at this point, did his brothers realize that Joseph was Hebrew, that he wasn't, or that he at least was not Egyptian?
No, they don't know who he is. No.
See, he's served by
No, he's the man. He's the man. They have no idea. No idea. He's the man.
Okay, let me look at that again. They served him by himself. So Joseph is eating alone.
Yeah.
Then the Egyptians over here at another table.
Yeah, the rest of the servants in the Joseph household, they're not eating
So
with
they
him.
didn't think that was peculiar that he wasn't. I guess because they were servants, that's why he wasn't eating with them. Because
No, I think the Hebrews knew. They have a custom here. They look down on us. They're not going to eat with us at the same table. I think they knew their status. We're Hebrews. We don't eat with Egyptians.
okay, that's not my question, but go ahead.
Okay, what is your question?
Well, I'm just saying that there's three different tables here. Now, first of all, was Joseph not?
Yeah, and Joseph is separate because he's the vizier of the land.
Okay, not
Okay,
because he was
whatever.
Hebrew.
He's a vizier. And they think he's an Egyptian vizier. So they wouldn't have thought that unusual at all.
Brothers do, but the Egyptians knew he wasn't, right? Didn't they know he was Hebrew?
The Egyptians knew who he was. Yes, the Egyptians. But they were going along with the ruse, okay? They're not going to reveal who he is, that he's Hebrew. He's not speaking in Hebrew. He understands them when they do. He's using Egyptian, the Egyptian language. He's dressed as an Egyptian. They do not know. And I would dare say at the time you probably could not tell just by looking.
Brothers didn't. Never mind. Go ahead.
No, I don't know why we get hung up on this point. I mean, here's the situation. He's by himself, the Egyptians by themselves, and the Hebrews by themselves. That's as simple as that needs to be on that. Okay, which verse are we in? Chapter Somebody, I've lost where we are.
32 is what we were just reading.
Thank you.
Ate by themselves.
Yeah, okay. They ate by themselves. All we see here is there was an custom that it was an abomination for Egyptians to eat with Hebrews. And they set before him the firstborn according to his birthright and the youngest according to his youth. Now, the table had been previously arranged. This is an astounding fact. How could this governor or his servants who actually set the table know the order in which we are to be seated? Now, they could have known Benjamin. Yeah, they could have known that. And maybe they could have known about Simeon if he had said some things. But how could he have known how to put them together according to their very ages? That would take an intimate knowledge of the family. You see what's going on here and why this is very important, and it caused them to be amazed. And the men looked at one another in amazement. Now, wow, what a coincidence that these seating arrangements show from the youngest to the oldest. Portions were taken to them from Joseph's table. But Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. And they drank and were merry with him. So this is his special, this is his blood-kin brother, meaning his full brother. This is his brother. And there's no indication here now. These are not the younger brothers they would have been years ago. There doesn't seem to be any resentment. Hey, why don't he get 5 times as much? It's like, fine. As long as he's going to stay alive, we can take him back to our daddy. You can give him all you want. You know, it's like they don't even worry about that aspect of it. Joseph tests his brothers, 44:1. Then he commanded the steward of his house, fill the men's sack with money as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest with his money for the grain. And he did as Joseph told him. Now the silver cup, according to archaeologists, historians, of the second in command in Egypt would have been a very significant cup. It's not just any old ornamental cup to drink out of. It was his divining cup. Whether he actually used it for that, since he was a Hebrew and he knew God answered prayers for guidance about the future. He already had that happen in interpreting dreams. Whether that's the case is irrelevant. It would be thought of as used for that. That's what the vizier's cup was used for divining. And there was this situation, they'd pour liquids into it, wine or something, and watch how it swirled around. And from that, they had their formula by which they could divine or predict the future. It was a divining cup. So just keep that in mind. That's, I think, going to figure in a little bit later as an allusion made in the narrative. And he did as Joseph told him. 3, as soon as the morning was light, and the men were sent away with their donkeys. They had only gone a short distance from the city. Now Joseph said to his steward, up, follow after the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is it not from this that my Lord drinks, and by this he practices divination? So you see, that's where we get the idea. You have done evil in doing this. So you took his special divining cup. When he overtook them, he spoke to them these words. They said to him, why does my Lord speak such words as these? Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. Behold, the money that we found in the mouths of our sacks we brought back to you from the land of Egypt. How then could we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? Which of your servants is found with it shall die. That's a rash thing. You see, and the Hebrews had a tendency to make rash statements like that. And it's always, we ought to learn from these sorts of things, like Jephthah's rash vow. Be careful about making these rash vows where they said, obviously none of us did that. You see, they were just too arrogant about it. It was the case. They just didn't know it. Let it be as you say, he who was found with it shall be my servant, and the rest of you shall be innocent. No, they said, well, let's see, I'm reading back. Behold the money. Which of your servants is found with it shall die, and we also will be my Lord's servants. He said, let it be as you say, he who is found with it shall be my servant, and the rest of you shall be innocent. Then each man quickly lowered his sack to the ground, and each man opened his sack. And he searched, beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest. And of course, you can guess where you're going to find it, right? And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Uh-oh. That's the thought on all the brothers' minds. Uh-oh. Then they tore their clothes, and every man loaded his donkey, and they returned to the city. In other words, we thought we had dodged a bullet. Everything seemed to be fine. The other situation about the money in our bags, that was all resolved. Now we're on the way back with food. We had a good time with the man. We ate in his house. And now, brother. They're going to take our brother Benjamin away from us. When Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, he was still there. They fell before him to the ground. Joseph said to them, "What deed is this that you have done? Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination? How could you fool me? I can see things. I knew who got them. I knew who stole the cup." Of course, he knew it all anyway. And Judah said, "What shall we say to my Lord?" I mean, it's like, what can I say? What can you say? What shall we speak? Or how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. So, what is he saying here? Judah is saying, you know, sir, whatever you do with us, we've come to recognize that we're being dealt with in this way because we're being punished. Were they being chastised in some manner? Of course they were, and they fully deserved it. And now here's the maturity of these young. Judah realized it. Judah's going to be a great leader, and his descendants, of course, some of the greatest of all of Israel. He found out the guilt of your servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also, in whose hand the cup has been found. But he said, "Far be it from me that I should do so. Only the man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my servant. But as for you, go up in peace to your father." In other words, you're going to leave Benjamin here. This is the very thing they feared. Then Judah went up to him and said, "Oh, my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's ears, and let not your anger burn against your servant. For you, like Pharaoh, are like Pharaoh himself. My Lord asked his servant, saying, Have you a father or brother? And we said to my Lord, We have a father, an old man, and a young brother, the child of his old age. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, Bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes on him. We said to my Lord, The boy cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. Then you said to your servants, Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall not see my face again. In other words, you're not allowed to buy grain here. When we went back to your servant, my father, we told him the words of my Lord. And when our father said, Go again, buy us a little food, we said, We cannot go down. If our youngest brother goes with us, then we will go down, for we cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Then your servant, my father, said to us, You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One left me, and I said, Surely he has been torn to pieces. So I don't know how he could contain himself hearing all this, but obviously he won't be able to very long. And I have never, and he says he's torn to pieces. Which verse are we in? 28. One left me, and I said, Surely he has been torn to pieces, and I've never seen him since. If you take this one also from me, and harm happens to him, you will bring down my gray hairs in evil to Sheol. We just read that a while ago. Now therefore, as soon as I come to your servant my father, and the boy is not with us, then as his life is bound up in the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. That's a perfectly natural parental reaction. And it would have been the case had this occurred. And your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant, our father, with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant, he's talking about himself, became a pledge of safety for the boy to my father, saying, If I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. Now therefore, please let your servant remain. Vicarious punishment. You're starting to see a number of themes here that are not coincidental. I am assured, since Moses was guided by the Holy Spirit of Almighty God to pen these words and to tell the story in the way that he did, and of course these events really happened, and he's selecting the parts of the story that matter for his readers and for us, that he's foreshadowing what Judah would finally be the tribe through whom would come the ultimate substitution for punishment. There's just a lot here. It's a very rich vein of doctrinal teaching, you might say. So, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame for my father all my life. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy. Again, substitutionary atonement, as it were. As a servant of my Lord, and let the boy go back with the brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father. I mean, this is an emotional climax. I don't know that I've seen a play, or perhaps some of you have seen it reenacted. I'm not sure. These details? I bet there is a story of Joseph. If you could find one that's not flaky or Catholic or goofy, let me know about it. I'd like to see this with good actors, perhaps not British, good actors who could somehow portray that. It's just the scene is just unbelievably emotional. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. He cried, "Make everyone go out for me." In other words, all the Egyptians. So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph." Now you just have to pause, because I don't know that much more could be said till the next question. I mean, there probably was a pause. You could have probably heard a pin drop, couldn't you? When the brothers, they look at this guy and he says, "I am Joseph." How could that be? They assumed he was just a lowly slave, or if not dead, they figured he's probably dead. "Is my father still alive?" Brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. This would be frightful as well. Here he is, the second in command in Egypt. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, please." And they came near, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life." Now, verse 5 is absolutely a key to understanding the workings of God in human affairs. There are several other key statements like this. This is one of those highlighted statements. Just think about this. He realized the very fact this situation is occurring. There had been a famine. You sold me off. Everything. We don't have to go over the details. I'm here. This chain of events, all these links in the chains came together at this place so that the posterity would be preserved. Abraham's seed would be preserved. And the promises made to humanity would be fulfilled through the Hebrews. Otherwise, they would have perished in Canaan in the drought. So this had to happen this way. For the famine, verse 6, has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. So he already knew. They didn't know this. I already know because God had revealed it in the dream to Pharaoh. Remember, there will be 7 years of famine, and we've only been into 2 so far. So it's going to be pretty rough if after 2 years they've had to make at least 2 trips. They should have made more, they said, back to Egypt to get grain. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. Wait a minute. Again, it's just pause and try to tease out all the meaning. You didn't do it. Well, obviously, no one is arguing with the facts stated in the narrative. They were the physical reason all of this had occurred, right? They were part in the physical world. Their hands and their decisions had brought about the chain of events that led to this climactic situation. But ultimately, behind it all, it was God doing it. Again, nothing here in any way negates the doctrine of free will. In fact, it affirms it. I don't see anything that more affirms the doctrine of free will. At the same time, showing the great power of God, that He's greater than all human choices combined. That God is able to foresee and to use all human choices such that His will in the world is ultimately worked out. Now, we just cannot fathom that in our minds. We cannot comprehend it. So, let's see. God did it. He has made me, in the middle of verse 8, a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry up and go to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph. Wow, what a news that's going to be to the father. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen. Now that'd be on the eastern side of the Nile. It's a lush, fertile area suitable for herds, for raising sheep. The Egyptians wouldn't have been it's Egyptian territory, but your average Egyptian wouldn't have hung around Goshen. They'd be closer to the Nile, closer to the cities built near on the Nile. They were city folks most. There were farmers, of course, too. And they did have cattle and they had sheep. but they looked down upon that profession. It was not such a great thing. So you shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and shall be near me, you and your children, and your children's children, your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have do not come to poverty. And now your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth that speaks to you. In other words, he brought them up close now. He's not hiding in the shadow. They are up looking at him face to face. And after all these years, they could still recognize, especially now, I would imagine he's speaking in Hebrew now, would you not? Speaking to them directly in Hebrew. You must tell my father of all my honor in Egypt, and of all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down here. Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them. After that, his brothers talked with him. Now that's a far cry from the pit episode back a long time ago in the Midianite traders. Now he's kissing his brothers and weeping. When the report was heard in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brothers have come. It pleased Pharaoh. This is a good Pharaoh, but this is a very wise Pharaoh. I don't know who this was exactly. And as I've said several times, it's notoriously difficult to harmonize the pharaohs of Egypt, the chronology of the pharaohs of Egypt, with Hebrew history. It's not absolutely impossible, and there are certain points of contact here and there, certain fixed points, peg dates that are pretty helpful. But overall, we're just some of the information we have about the different dynasties in Egypt. It's just difficult to know precisely. There's a lot of debate about it, and I don't see the purpose in going into all the ins and outs of those kinds of debates, not at this point about this Pharaoh. We just know this was one of the wise pharaohs. He allowed Joseph to make provisions and to be in command, and he's also favorable to Joseph. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, Lord, load your beasts and go back to the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat of the fat of the land. And you, Joseph, are commanded to say, do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Have no concern for your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. So they're being invited in under very favorable circumstances, are they not? The sons of Israel did so. And Joseph gave them wagons according to the command of Pharaoh, and gave them provisions for the journey. To each of all of them he gave a change of clothes. But to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 changes of clothes. To his father he sent as follows: 10 donkeys loaded with good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and provisions for his father on the journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they departed he said to them, do not quarrel on the way. Now, why would this man, this second in command in Egypt, say that to the family as they're about to leave? These are his brothers, and he knows them. What will they likely do once they get away? What game is going to begin? What kind of game will begin with them? The blame game. I told you not to harm the child. But wait a minute. The irony is, had they not done this horrible deed, they wouldn't be here with all these blessings. That's the irony of it. It's just the irony. And of course, we cannot lose sight of the irony, and we don't when we read it. So don't get in a fight about this. He's trying to tell them, you meant it all for bad, but look, let's get over those petty things. I know you meant to hurt me, but I see now there's a bigger reason for all this. Oh, if we only had that kind of faith today. So they went out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan, their father Jacob, and they told him, Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt. Here, I like to talk about the knowledge situation. And his heart became numb, for he did not believe them. They just reported it, and he thought, that cannot be true. Why? What had his conviction been about his son Joseph for decades now? He knew he's dead. He just knew it. He just knew it. He knew that he knew that he knew. But he didn't know it. The evidence was bogus. The evidence was faulty. His son was not dead. He was just misled. They lied to him. So he couldn't accept it. Now that first of all, they had told him he was dead. Now they said, no, he's not really dead. He's a commander of Egypt. He's alive and he's a commander of Egypt. He couldn't believe it. But when they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, that's pretty good empirical evidence that somebody blessed him for some reason down there in Egypt. The spirit of their father revived. Now this is one of the few times I think you could say that about Jacob in his very sad, melancholy life. Here, his spirit revives when he learns, my son's not dead. And Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. And I wish we had time to go into this. It's just really heating up, isn't it? So we'll have to start next time at chapter 46, verses 1 and following. Any questions or any comments? Apologize for not being quite up to snuff. As I said, I'm up to steroids. You can probably tell that. But anyway, maybe we'll all be well. Hopefully the rest of you will avoid the plague that's been going around and feel all right. Some of you already been through some of that, I know. Thank you very much for your attention.